Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a third installment of my reference video idea. So this is fragrance video on this channel, by the way, number 998. So we will be coming up on 1,000 videos soon, which I'm very excited about. And I think for 1,000 videos, I'm just gonna pop on, do a live stream so you guys can kind of celebrate with me and just kind of do an Ask Me Anything kind of live stream. So that should be fun. Look out for that coming up very soon because we're coming up on 1,000 videos faster than I'm ready for. But I think that's at least something to celebrate. I like celebrating these milestones because I do work hard. I worked all day, went to the gym afterwards, came back, and now I'm doing this video. So I basically had like a 20-hour day almost, it feels like. But it's late at night here in Texas. This is going to be a long video, so we better get into it. But just a brief intro for those of you who wandered in and have no clue what's going on here in this reference video idea. So I do many different kind of lists. This is not a top 10 this year in perfume, and a lot of those videos are extremely deep, okay? The depth of those videos can go on and on and on, sometimes for hours, okay? And sometimes just focusing on a single note. So my idea here was to sort of condense some of that. Pick 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe max, of my all-time favorite fragrances in my collection from a particular note. So we're going to have things like tuberose. I'm going to list what I think are the reference tuberose fragrances, okay? So if you want to get to know the note of tuberose, these are the fragrances I would recommend. So that's the idea, to condense it down into a fun, watchable format. We can talk about many different notes. There are 2 other videos like this where we covered things like aldehydes, ambergris, honey, iris, leather, patchouli, rose, all these other things that I've already covered in part 1 and part 2. So today we're going to do 16 more notes. At least I think there's 16 in here. Someone will keep me honest at the end, but there's a whole laundry list. So without further ado, let us get started. Scent of the day, just real quick, is a decant. And interestingly enough, this is a fragrance that I think I'm going to try and do a comparison video with the original because this is a fragrance that came out in the year 2000 and it's from the house of Knize. It's called Knize, I don't know how, Knize 10, but this one's called Golden Edition. And Golden Edition came out in the year 2000. The original Knize 10 came out in the year 1925. And both fragrances, this and the original, are credited to Vincent Robar as one of the perfumers. Now, Francois Coty is the other perfumer on the original. This one's only credited to Vincent Robar. Now, if that's true, and he created the one in 1925 and the Golden Edition flanker in the year 2000, that means he had to be in his 90s, maybe 100 when he created this. So I don't know how true that is, but I am very impressed with this fragrance. As a leather lover, a lover of IBQ leathers and stuff like that, this is something to definitely write home about. And it's so wearable, surprisingly wearable. Has so many facets to it. I'm gonna review this. Maybe even a comparison video between the OG would be a fun way to do it. So, but this is discontinued, unfortunately. Very spicy leather. Lots of castoreum, ambergris, moss in the base. I love it. Okay, so let's get started. So first, I just basically sort of rank these in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with the A's and move on down. So the first note we're going to discuss today is Angelica. Now, Angelica is one of my kind of secret favorite notes because it adds this very distinctive kind of smell. Fragrances that use Angelica in my collection are ones that kind of really stand out. Some I've worn as kind of signature scents to the office and stuff like that. Very aromatic, kind of herbaceous type smell that gives you this green, sort of like rooty, earthy feeling, you know, vegetal, earthy. You can imagine like animals burrowing in the dirt kind of thing in forests with kind of shades, light coming through the shady leafy trees. Very intriguing depth of Angelica. So my reference Angelica fragrances first, you're going to have to take my word for this because I could not find my sample and I spent way too much time looking for it. But one of my perfume god people sent me a 5 ml decant of Angéliques sous la Pluie, which is also, by the way, one of the most beautifully named fragrances I've ever come across. That sounds like an angel wrote that name. Angéliques sous la Pluie. But it's bergamot, juniper berry, pink pepper in the top with Angelica in the heart. The heart is Angelica. cedarwood and white musk. Jean-Claude Elena did that, and Jean-Claude Elena has a way of creating these very ethereal fragrances. And many people gave this fragrance a hard time for its longevity and stuff like that. But I found it lasted a long time. It just had that kind of Jean-Claude Elena DNA. But I have a full review. Well, in a early impression, as close to a full review as you're going to get off of me just wearing a decan a couple times. But Angelique sous la pluie is definitely one that I would add to the collection if money was no issue. And the other one in my reference, well, actually two more, reference Angelica fragrances, is also a Frédéric Malle, and this is called Badage. Well, it was originally called Badage. I think now it's French Lover. I can't remember. But this is a pre-Estee Lauder bottle that I have, and I cherish this. This is a perfect office scent because it does exactly what I said. Galbanum adds to the greenness. Beautiful Florentine iris used here with that Angelica and vetiver, so it's very rooty, very earthy, and much more green than Royal Oud, which also uses this very interesting combination of Galbanum and Angelica. And interestingly enough, Pierre Bourdon is the perfumer of note here, but there's a rumor that Jean-Claude Elena actually made this fragrance, or I shouldn't say he made the fragrance, because obviously Pierre Bourdon kind of put the finishing touches on it, but the rumor is Jean-Claude Elena created most of the fragrance. By the time this was set to come out, he signed an exclusive in-house perfumer contract with Aramis. That's when he went and made Terre. Probably his best, well, definitely his best-selling and biggest hit fragrance he's ever made. But so he couldn't release it. So Frédéric Malle needed a big-name perfumer to tweak a couple things and release it. And Pierre Bourdon did just that and released French Lover. Now, what's so interesting about that is Pierre Bourdon's pupil, Julien Rascanet, then put out Royal Oud, which many people compare to French Lover. And there's definitely some similarities. But this is definitely the greener of the two. Royal Oud is going to show up in our reference list, but it's going to show up under a different note, which will, if you know Royal Oud, you know exactly what that is before I even say it. This is a very green, spicy, extremely professionally masculine type affair. Little wisps of frankincense in the base. I mean, it's just a beautiful, green, earthy, rooty type experience. Now, I've got one more in the Angelica section here that's going to probably surprise some folks a little bit, but I love what Annick Minardo did with the Angelica and the top of this fragrance. This is discontinued, unfortunately, but it's from the house of D Squared, and it's called Potion. Now, many people talk about kind of the amber and the cinnamon and all that stuff in here, but I am really taken with the top. She used thyme, Angelica, and mint, and that was such a unique, interesting opening for a designer. I really wish designers started to do stuff like this again. I was really taken with this. I've never smelled any of the flankers. Apparently there's a rose flanker of this, which is pretty good, but I'm happy to have the original for what it's worth, and I'll review this one of these days. So D Squared Potion. The Angelica in the top is pretty impressive if you really pay attention to it, especially in the first 10-15 minutes. Okay, so next on the list, we're going to talk about aquatic fragrances. Now, aquatic fragrances are usually not my thing. However, I have learned that I like my aquatic fragrances done the way they used to do them in the late 80s or early 90s. There was a very, demarcated shift in thinking for creating aquatic fragrances when things like Armani did, gosh, I hate it so much. I've literally blocked the name Aqua de Jo out of my head. I can't even remember the name Aqua de Jo anymore. But yes, Aqua de Jo came out in the mid 90s, and then you started to get these very watery, very fresh, very transparent. It was almost like a rebellion from what was going on in the 80s. But I like some of the ways that aquatic fragrances were done in the 80s and early 90s before that hard shift, if you will. So one of the ones that I think is kind of like a reference, and it's still available for you to purchase, I believe, as long as Aramis is keeping this line open. Rumor is this whole line is discontinued by some people. Parfumo says it's still available. I don't know. But this is called New West. And interestingly enough, they don't market this as an EDT or an EDP. They market it as a skin scent, which I always thought was very interesting. And so this is definitely some marine touches here and there, but it's done in the 80s style. This is done by Yves Tanguy, and it is very fresh, slightly aquatic, but what I like about it is the 80s kind of DNA kicks in. So you get things like pine and bay leaf and coriander and lavender and caraway and geranium and juniper and jasmine and cedar and oak moss and patchouli. You get the idea. Leather even. And so if you just took that marine aquatic kind of top note out, you would have what smells like a proper 80s masculine to some effect. Very spicy, very woody, very fresh. But the addition of that marine note kind of changes this a little bit. And, you know, this was also around the time that Cool Water came out in the late 80s. And so there was definitely this kind of push that started to go this route. But I really like this, and I'll review this one of these days. That was 1988, okay? 1990, we have Edmund Rudnitska's sort of last opus creation, if you will, his final fragrance. And Edmund Rudnitska is roundly considered to be one of the greatest perfumers of all time. Definitely, I think, one of the most influential perfumers. And this is called Ocean Rain. Now, I'll review this as well one day, but Ocean Rain is a very strange fragrance. It's like, yes, you're in the ocean, okay? Maybe even yes, it rains, but the rain is not normal rain. It's acidic rain. And the ocean is not normal ocean. It's the ocean from 189 billion years ago. Well, that's exaggerating, but you get the idea. It feels like the ocean as the earth was forming, you know? It feels like the ocean is filled with this hydrogen peroxide smelling kind of goo, if you will, that is slightly dirty. You know, like if you can imagine being in the ocean and think of all the things that go on in the ocean, think of the death that happens in the ocean. Think of the wars, the animals fight, the food they eat they eat each other and all that stuff. And think of all the stuff that's dumped in the ocean. And this fragrance very strangely, you know, highlights this marine-like aspect, but it's almost like this ancient marine. It's like when you know, fish kind of started to grow legs and walked from one pool to the other kind of thing. There is this very strange early evolutionary feeling to this oceanic creation, but it's so out there and so kind of revolutionary in a way. I think it was much more influential to other perfumers than it was to the market, because it's interesting because Edmund Rudnitska, obviously, he created so many beautiful fragrances for Dior, Christian Dior, and all of these big name brands, right? And then his final fragrance is done for Mario Valentino, which was basically like a shop in the mall that was kind of like the Buckle back in the 1980s or something. And it's this obscure kind of brand, but obviously they let him do whatever he wanted, and he wanted to create a fragrance using some marine type notes. And they allowed him to, and he wanted to do it in his way. So this has things like Artemisia, lavender, rose, cyclamen, thyme, fir, amber, cedar, frankincense, leather, and moss. And then you get the marine notes. You get green touches, you get basil, lemon. And so it is a strange creation, but I think it was very revolutionary. And I'll give you an example of why. My next fragrance on the list is one of the pupils himself of Edmund Rudnitska, and it is back to Pierre Bourdon. So Pierre Bourdon pretty much, in my opinion, made the House of Creed what it is. If it wasn't for Pierre Bourdon, Creed would not be Creed as it is today. I don't think anyone can dispute that. Especially if you've read The Ghost Perfumer, Pierre Bourdon was indispensable, okay? And in 1992, I would say up until, let's say, Millésime Imperial. So when he created Millésime Imperial, there was this shift where I think that was when Edmund Rudnitska was really starting to get sick and ended up passing away. And he kind of made this shift in his creation. So early on, many of his creations gave a huge nod to Edmund Rudnitska. And this is one such example, I think, that really takes more bits and pieces from Ocean Rain, who Edmund Rudnitska was Pierre Bourdon's kind of master, if you will. And Pierre Bourdon was the student. And so in 1992, it feels like Pierre Bourdon was still heavily relying on Edmund Runitska when he did some of these creations, that he really took what his master kind of made, and Ocean Rain was obviously something that he really focused on with a microscope, and then kind of did his own thing, riffed off of it a little bit. And Erolfa has some of that Creed DNA. It has the freshness. You get much more sparkly, fresh, sort of attractive aquatic, sort of citrusy notes in the top here. So you get bergamots, lemon, orange, and they're done in the Creed style. Creed does fresh fragrances very, very well. That's one of their big calling cards, right? So when you compare these two, in the opening, this one's just going to smell kind of strange, you know? And this one's going to smell very, very attractive in the opening. But they start to kind of come together in a strange way. This has cumin, which you would not expect in an aquatic. This has violet. It has melon. It has ginger, coriander, jasmine, pepper, cyclamen, musk, oak moss, sandalwood, cedarwood, and amber. And so obviously this is much more, this is not as artistic, but it still does have some artistic touches. Like, for example, sometimes you'll get this weird kind of green pine note in Erolfa. So you think pine in a aquatic, you know, it's kind of this throwback to the way they were doing it in the late 80s. Even though this is a 1990s aquatic, it hasn't come to that Aqua de Joe kind of demarcated left-hand turn, if you will. But yes, these are the type of aquatics that I prefer to wear. I prefer to wear these much more than something like Aqua de Joe. Okay, enough about aquatics. Next on the list, we're going to talk about cannabis. So cannabis fragrances will usually add this kind of strange, dirty, sour, kush smell, cannabis smell. Sometimes it can be smoky, and there's a couple in my collection that I really rate. One, unfortunately, again, is discontinued, but this fragrance is, I think, Gisa Schoen's masterpiece. Of all of the Gisa Schoen fragrances I've smelled, this is the one that I think is truly his masterpiece, and it's called Kinsky by Kinsky. So Klaus Kinsky was an actor, a German actor, who was a genius, but he was troubled. Okay, and there were some really bad allegations made against him. I don't want to get into that because I don't know what's true and what's not true and any of that. But let's just say, needless to say, he was big enough to have his own fragrance. Okay, so he was a big shot in some form or fashion. And if you take a look at the bottle, you'll notice the bottle of Kinsky looks very much like Gisa Schoen's eccentric molecule bottles. There's no cap, you know, it's just the little instant sprayer. But this came out in 2012, all right, and it's discontinued. But this is aldehydes, cannabis, blackcurrant, juniper, and bergamot. And the cannabis note is there from the beginning. So is castoreum. And what's so strange about this, so is marine notes. And you wouldn't think marine notes would go with things like cannabis, blackcurrant, juniper, castoreum, hedione, rose, nutmeg, patchouli, lots of patchouli, and vetiver, labdanum, musk, styrax, amber, benzoin, cedarwood, and suede. So it actually does go suedey into the dry down as well. Leathery, suedey. The castoreum adds that unbelievable warmth, and it's one of the most animalic fragrances I've ever smelled Gisa Schoen make. The cannabis note is heaviest in the top, all right, but you will pick it out from time to time as the fragrance dries down. I think that this is almost Gisa Schoen trying to sort of try to compare and contrast in a fragrance genius and insanity, because there's a very thin line between being a super genius and being insane, right? And this fragrance kind of feels like that. If you look at the marketing of this, it's almost like gold and black smoke coming together, you know, like these two sort of schools of thought merging together. And the box, which I have somewhere, is crazy because it looks like almost like you're looking at just an eye, one of his eyes on the box, and just a small piece of his face, like you're literally looking into the man's soul. And so this didn't sell well, obviously, because I really think that if the average person smelled this, they would be like, my God, that is just way too much. But for the hardcore frag heads, this is probably the kind of stuff that you're really going to dig. So, and the cannabis accord is very cool. Okay, a couple more cannabis fragrances. One I reviewed on the channel within the last couple months, and it's from one of my favorite houses of all time, Arige La Dorée, and this is called Forbidden Flower. This one actually came out this year in 2024. It's from the Musks collection, and Forbidden Flower has a hemp flower accord and a skunk accord. And sometimes if you're a marijuana smoker, you know that they will refer to it as skunk weed. And so there's definitely some sort of, you know, connection there with the skunk, and that's actual skunk oil used in here. One of the rare animalic ingredients. So there it is, Forbidden Flower. And you can see I put a pretty good dent in my little decant here. I actually really like this. Surprisingly like it. I really like the grapefruit in the top. One of my, I don't want to say favorite grapefruit openings, but the grapefruit accord was very, very well done here. The jasmine in here is beautiful. Go watch my full review if you really want to get more details on Forbidden Flower. But he basically says, inspired by modern times when animalic ingredients are banned and natural floral materials are highly restricted, let us dive into the wicked beauty of both. So hemp, flower, oil, and actual skunk. And very, very interesting. And that in that lime thing was, I remember the lime being very prominent when you wouldn't expect it to. Very great fragrance. Very interesting take on a floral, sort of spicy, animalic fragrance. The skunk is a little bit sour. It's like, imagine like the sourest butter you could ever imagine. You know, imagine the texture of butter. That's kind of how the skunk oil smells. And obviously, if you use too much, it's just going to be disgusting, because skunk, one of the hardest things about working with skunk is there are some animalic notes, like for example, musk. Well, deers use musk to kind of attract. Well, skunk, they use their powers for repelling. They want people, they want animals and other things that want to eat them to stay away. So you have to be very careful with how much skunk you actually use. But Forbidden Flower is one such fragrance. The other one, which I reviewed on the channel, and I do not know where the sample's at, is called Ganja Kasturi. Hell of a name by Prin. I really like the name, and surprisingly, I really like the fragrance. But if you want, in my opinion, now there were some people, if you go watch that video, there are some people who are like, no, you have to try this. This is a more realistic cannabis accord. But from what I have smelled, that is the most realistic cannabis smell. Like, I would be scared to spray that on and go drive a car, because if a cop pulled you over, he's going to think you're stoned to bejesus. But Ganja Kasturi, I've got a full review on the channel. You can check it out. I will say and it's almost like a lit cannabis accord. From memory, I remember thinking that it almost reminded me of like burnt rolling papers, you know? There was a burnt feeling to the cannabis in the first hour or so. And then it starts to go into, I don't want to say a common Prin accord, but if you know Prin's work, I don't think what it dries down to would surprise you too much. But the opening surprised me by how realistic that cannabis accord was. So Ganja Kasturi, I've got a full review on the channel from 2021 by Prin. Okay, so that's my cannabis reference fragrances. Next on the list, we're going to Cedar. And Cedar is a citrusy, woody, sort of sometimes camphoraceous-like smell. And depending on the type of cedar, sometimes it can smell like kind of pencil shavings, are sometimes associated with cedar smell. So there's a couple that I'm going to highlight here. The first one is a discontinued designer scent from 2005 from the house of Christian Lacroix, and this is called Tumulte Porom. And this is long discontinued. Used to be very cheap, though. Used to be able to find this for like 20, 30 bucks. Now it sells for hundreds, of course. But it's a very spicy, woody, slightly smoky take on cedar. It uses Atlas cedar, Chinese cedar, Texas cedar, and Virginia cedar. 4 types of cedar. And so this is one of the few fragrances that really reminds me of like walking into a Home Depot, you know? You know when you walk into a Home Depot and sometimes they're like freshly cutting 2x4s or something in there, and there's all that wood stacked up. This is very reminiscent of that, but the frankincense adds a little bit of smoke with the woodiness. It's not a complex fragrance, I don't think, but it's a very well done woody scent. Very well done cedar, specifically cedar. The focus on cedar is what really sets this apart. What sucks is it's so hard to find. And you can't find bottles for 20 or 30 or 40 bucks anymore unless the person doesn't know what they have. But these sell for hundreds, and this is the baby bottle. You know, if you try to get the 50 or 100 mil, you're going to pay God knows how much. So that's one from 2005. Another of my favorite cedar scents is Creed's Royal Oud. And so this is actually my second flacon of this. That's how much I love this scent. It used to be one of my big time signature scents. And I'll tell you, between Aventus in 2010 and Royal Oud in 2011, I think those 2 years were Creed's best years for me. You know, they were really onto something. They were rocking and rolling in 2010 and 2011. But this is created by Julien Rascanet. I mentioned the connection to Pierre Bourdon when we started the video, when we started talking about Bois and there's definitely a connection between these two. But this is much more cedary and spicy, and this is much more green and earthy and vegetal in a sense. And so Royal Oud, it's so distinct, you know, and that's that. I was mentioning the Angelica. This could probably be in the Angelica reference video as well, but I wanted to put it with the cedar because it is one of my favorite cedar wood type creations. Even though it's called Royal Oud, a lot of cedar. You get a ton of cedar with clove and frankincense, ambergris, gaiac wood, and musk. And that Angelica galbanum combination is very reminiscent of French Lover. So very woody, very spicy, and shout out to Julien Rascanet for creating one of my favorite creeds. Okay, final cedar fragrance I'm going to highlight is a little bit of a unicorn because it's a creation by Hans Hendley, and I reviewed it on the channel thanks to a very generous drop from a patron, and it's called Bloodline. I would love a bottle of Bloodline. I honestly think Bloodline may be the best cedar scent I've ever smelled. It is, go watch my review. No one almost watched that because it's just me holding an empty decant, you know, going, hey. Amazing cedar. Apparently it was like based on this cedar tree that grew on his parents' land or something. His parents had land in Texas, and they had this very specific type of cedar that grew, and this was kind of modeled after that, if you will. So very resinous and smoky. Bloodline is hard to find, though. Very hard to find. Even harder to sample. But if you're of the blind buying type and you're lucky enough to, you almost have to go into a lottery to buy it. That's how popular it is. But Hans Hendley, I think he made it for American Perfumer, if I'm not mistaken. Bloodline. So, okay, so those are the reference cedars. So next on the list, we have chocolate. Now, chocolate, this is going to be a wide, varied type of variety because I love chocolatey patchouli, but I also love chocolate and oud. Chocolate and oud goes very well together. And then we've got just a pure gourmand chocolate that would blow your mind. So the first one we're going to discuss when it comes to chocolate is Stante Geron. Mine is the Eau Extreme, which they used to do back in the day. Now they discontinued this Eau Extreme thing, and they just do Eau de Parfum, which this is basically the Eau de Parfum from 2005. Beatrice Piquet, rest in peace, created this. She also created Trussardi Uomo from 1983. Her two best fragrances, in my opinion, hands down. This and Trussardi Uomo, which I reviewed Trussardi Uomo on the channel. I will review this one day as well. But this is star anise, citrus notes, elemi, patchouli blossom, jasmine, neroli, cacao. The cacao gives it the chocolatiness, and of course the patchouli. Sometimes patchouli can come across as very chocolatey as well, with cedar, sandalwood, hibiscus seed, which is basically ambrette, one of my favorite ingredients, and tea. Man, this is just, and you have to remember at the time, this was competing with Dior Homme. So this and Dior Homme from 2005, what a year for designer fragrances. Dior Homme and Stante Geron. And so I really want a bottle of the Eau de Toilette one day. That is high on my wish list. But I've got 2 bottles of this stuff because I love it so much. And it's probably one of my favorite gourmands, you know. So Beatrice Piquet absolutely knocked it out of the park. And, you know, some consider this to be like the last great Guerlain, which I would agree with. I could not argue with that fact if that's kind of the stance they take. Okay, next on the list is from a sample set. But I did review this, but there's others from the set I didn't. So maybe one day I'll review them, but there's a live stream on this as well. So for those of you who are new to the channel, if you go to my live streams, and there's a ton of them you'll scroll through, but eventually you'll get to one from the House of Strangelove. And Strangelove, New York City, is a very expensive kind of fragrance house. They're exorbitantly expensive, but they make very good sense. And this one's called Melt My Heart. And Melt My Heart came out in 2015. And I think Melt My Heart kind of was one of those fragrances that, again, inspired other creations maybe more than some people think. It's like a gourmand take on oud, because there is oud, and it smells like real oud in here as well. With this very dark chocolate, specifically dark chocolate accord. And this beautiful orris butter. Very high quality ingredients in these Strangelove fragrances. And basically, it's based on romance and indulgence for devoted lovers. The sumptuous Oriental contains pure orris butter, a sought-after delicacy in perfumery, for which there is no substitute. Like the warmth of true love, orris butter is irreplaceable. Our sensual blend is deepened by the sultriness of beloved oud and sandalwood. Soothing ylang-ylang combines with hints of refreshing absinthe and French sage to boost spirits, within the irresistible influence purified ginger, stimulating mandarin, and luscious dark chocolate. Luscious. Complete this enthralling creation. So tender and poetic. There you go. A very gourmand take on a chocolatey oud. And interestingly enough, magnolia is used here. And there's another perfumer who I discuss all the time that loves to use magnolia. His name is Dmitry Bortnikov. And a couple years after Melt My Heart came out, Dmitry Bortnikov put out one of my favorite chocolatey ouds, and this is called Oud Monar. Now, Oud Monar is a 2019 release, so we're talking 4 years after Melt My Heart. And he uses frangipani and magnolia here. So magnolia was used in both fragrances, and I think they smell very similar, personally. It's one of the reasons why I don't have a bottle of Melt My Heart. Well, this doesn't have the orris butter thing that's going on in Melt My Heart, but they both play in the same sandbox. Enough for me that I would just wear Oud Monar if I wanted this DNA. Especially since I think the Strangelove is like $795 or something insane for a full bottle. But this is magnolia, frangipani, rose de mai, Himalaya rose, cinnamon, tobacco, oud maruki, oud ko chang from Feel Oud, cacao, civet, castoreum, labdanum, and vanilla. And so you definitely get this chocolatey oud in here. There's no doubt about it. If you're a fan of chocolatey ouds, Oud Monar is one that you really have to sniff. I'm a huge fan, and you can see I put a pretty decent dent in this, and I have reviewed this on the channel as well. So Oud Monar from Bortnikov. Okay, and finally, one of the most gourmand, thickest, they were talking about words like sultry and sumptuous and all of this stuff. That's how I would describe this next fragrance from the House of Clandestine Laboratories. Very decadent chocolate, and it's called Novichok, which, if you know that word, that's basically a nerve agent, and it's aptly named. Novichok is a very, very gourmand take on chocolate. Basically, think of chocolate cake. Like, imagine the thickest, richest, densest chocolate cake you can imagine. That's what Novichok smells like, with some rose and resins and stuff like that. It would smell, with cacao, it would smell killer on a woman. But not for the office. You don't want to wear that to the office. That's like you're going out after the office fragrance. But yeah, there's a Clandestine Laboratories interview with Mark Sage. If you're into watching my live streams or the interviews, go pull that Mark Sage interview. We talk about Novichok in that live stream. So it was a pleasure to have Mark on and to get to know his creation. So Novichok is one that, if you're a fan of chocolate, that's one you really have to smell. Okay, Next on the list, we're going to discuss the note of cinnamon. Now, cinnamon is usually used to add this sort of warming spiciness, if you will, to a fragrance. And what's so interesting about my reference cinnamon creations, fragrances, is that they're all from around the same era. And I've often commented on the fact that the late 80s, early 90s use of cinnamon seemed to be very unique in the range of perfumery that I've smelled. And some of my favorite cinnamon fragrances come from that time. So the first one is a very well-known and loved fragrance from the house of Chanel. It is Egoist. One of my many, many bottles. The older ones had this sort of silvery cap. The newer ones have this black cap. All Egoist is good. Even the newer ones are good. They just don't last as long. You could have like the newer one, Egoist, for summer, and then the older ones, Egoist, for winter. But Egoist is a 1990 release by the great Jacques Polge and Francois Demachy. Coriander, rosewood, mahogany, mandarin orange, cinnamon, carnation, rose, sandalwood, tobacco, vanilla, amber, and leather. And this is just such a spicy, woody, warming kind of scent. I love Egoist, and I will, one of these days, I'll get up the intestinal fortitude to review it. Now, one of the all-time great discontinued and highly sought-after fragrances that I did have the intestinal fortitude to review is Balenciaga Pour Homme. There's like a 50-minute review on my channel of Balenciaga Pour Homme. And this is spicy, woody, but it's a Gerard Anthony. I called it like a Oriental Fougere, which may make no sense to some people. It's nothing like the aromatic fougères. It's nothing like Sar or Gucci Nobile or anything like that, right? This is done in a way that I don't know if I've ever smelled a fragrance that smells like this is the thing. The way that the spices swirl in here. And if you look at the cap, you know, there's almost like this swirling thing going on, but it's like you can't see through it, right? Thomas from the Early Greek channel, who very sadly took all of his videos off of YouTube, which I wish he knew. I wish he wouldn't have done that because I loved his old videos. But he compared this to a specific type of rock called obsidian. And if you know obsidian, it's this deep black looking rock where it looks like light can't get in and can't get out, and it just has this unbelievable amount of kind of depth. And you know, like it's the exact opposite of transparent. There's something so thick and heavy, and the cinnamon in here, Ceylon cinnamon specifically, adds to that with the patchouli, and of course the Yugoslavian oak moss, which we miss the good old Yugoslavian oak moss. Maybe that's why this is discontinued. But if you want like a full breakdown, go watch my review of Balenciaga Pour Homme. I really poured my heart and soul into that one. Okay. Next on the list, we have a fragrance from the house of Romeo Jiggly, which gets almost no love. And this is a fragrance from 1991. So you can see we have two from 1990, one from 1991. And this is called Romeo Jiggly Per Uomo with the green juice and the very cool cap that actually snaps on like so. So you have to kind of pull it up and then you can pull it out. But this is unbelievably a creation by Alberto Morillas, back when Alberto Morillas used to do very complex type of perfumery, you know, very different from what he kind of turned into, where you know, now he's the guy that just seems to pump everything out and very designer and all that good stuff. But back then, there's no way in hell you could put this under somebody's nose who knows what's going on in perfumery, and they would think it's an Alberto Morillas, not unless they knew. But this is aldehydes, tarragon, which I love, mandarin orange, Brazilian rosewood, grapefruit, plum. The plum is brilliant. Lemon tree, lavender, bergamot, balsam fir, cinnamon, honey, jasmine, rose, carnation, ginger, patchouli, sandalwood, oak moss, tonka bean, vanilla, amber, benzoin, cedarwood, musk, and styrax. So this is shockingly good, unbelievably good. Maybe a little bit more designer smelling than the first two, but I love how it goes in all these different directions. It's got the green touches from the balsam fir and tarragon and all this stuff. You know, it's got the spicy, woody elements. It's got the warming feeling of cinnamon. It's got the resins. It's got the honey, which I love honey. Just a beautiful designer creation. The only thing that I I can think of that I've ever smelled that comes close. And actually, I'm going to add this to the list too, because I think it deserves to be here. But Jacques Bogart Witness. If you've ever smelled Witness, there are some similarities. Witness goes a little bit more into the pine kind of territory, if you will, but this also deserves to be on the cinnamon list. And so I'm gonna just on the fly add Witness from 1992. So we've got 2 from 1990, 1 from 91, 1 from 92. That gives you an idea. There was definitely something in the air in the early 90s that allowed these cinnamon heavy fragrances to really shine. So, okay, so now that cinnamon's done, we're moving on to the note of cypress. Now, cypress is a very sort of medicinal note. It can remind you a little bit of cedar and pine, but it's much more medicinal, okay? And it's a very soothing, calming type of scent, really. And so, actually, I didn't even grab the bottle on this one, so I am remiss. But the first one on the list is Halston Z14, which will definitely get a Vintage Hall of Fame review. This inspired people like Tom Ford, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But Z14 is spicy, woody perfection from the mid 70s. Vincent Marcello and Max Gavari created this. Yeah, I mean, this is this also could have been on the cinnamon list as well, but I wanted to include it on the cypress list for many reasons. But you'll see here in just a minute why as well. But cypress is in the top, along with basil, moss, amber, benzoin, musk, frankincense, leather, and tonka bean. The smell of discotheques in the 70s is kind of how I think of Halston Z14. And then we're going to jump to 1998, so a few years before Jean-Claude Elena becomes in-house perfumer, but he was involved in this fragrance for Hermes, and it is called Robar. Now, Robar is very outdoor smelling. You get the balsam firs, you get the kind of freshness, you get the medicinal cypress like being in a forest, but you get other woods, but there's these vintage sort of floral notes in here, and this is marketed towards men, but there's violet and there's carnation. There's spices, there's cardamom, which usually adds this very cooling touch. And then there's what amazes me about Robar every time I wear it is the way that the benzoin adds this layer of kind of syrupy, kind of not too syrupy. I don't want you to think it's like disgustingly sweet or anything like that. But there is this kind of this base, you know, there's this base that I think this is one of the most designer smelling Hermes fragrances from in the vintage era. You know, you take something like Bellamy and compare it to Robar, and there's no comparison for me. Bellamy wipes the floor with this, but I think this is still a very, very interesting creation. And it's kind of the way that vanilla and benzoin, I think, interplay with each other. You know, they add this warmth, this warming element to it. And I wouldn't be surprised if this also has cinnamon, even though it's not listed. But there's definitely this kind of you know, element of warmth in this bed that it sits on that you really smell while you're smelling the cypress and all the other notes. A very interesting creation. I'll review it one of these days. There's something very outdoorsy about Robar to me. And then finally we have Tom Ford's Italian Cypress, which I reviewed on the channel based on this beautiful decant from a friend. And Italian Cypress is a 2008 release, and Z14 so inspired Tom Ford that he put out Italian Cypress, which is basically a niche version of Z14. I think they amped up some ingredients, like for example, they used galbanum. I don't think there was galbanum in Z14. And peppermint. I don't think there was peppermint in Z14, but you will definitely see the similarities here. If you know one, you'll kind of know the other. I would like a bottle of this, but I would never pay the big money it's going for nowadays since it's discontinued. But yes, go watch my review of Italian Cypress if you're interested in cypress fragrances. Okay, so next on the list we've got jasmine. Now jasmine can be a tough one because there's all different types of jasmine. Apparently there's something like 60 jasmine varieties or something. I forget exactly how much, but there's a lot of different jasmines. But the main ones in perfumery are Jasmine Sambac, which kind of has this piercing, you know, freshness to it that many old school masculine fragrances used to use, and Jasmine Grandiflorum, which that's the one that has this kind of honeyed, floral, sweet, kind of indolic jasmine that you probably know and have smelled in many fragrances. So this is one of my favorite jasmine fragrances I've ever come across, ever. It's from the house of Royal Oud, which is a collaboration between Dmitry Bortnikov and Russian Atom. And this one's called Oud De Grand. And Oud De Grand is one I ended up stumbling across. This was a gift from a friend, by the way, because I wasn't impressed with some of the others from the house. Like, I wasn't too impressed with Oud Balsam, and I wasn't too impressed with Sunshine and Sunrise and Set. But Oud De Grand was a love. Shockingly love, because usually I don't like these white floral type of fragrances, but the Jasmine Grandiflorum in here is, oh shit, the ring stayed in there. Damn it, I gotta get there we go. Aha, you get back in there, buddy. There you go. Okay, let's try this again. Oh no, I must have put it on sideways. Now it's not. Now the magnetic cap is not going on the right way. So I'm gonna have to turn this. The joys of live TV. All right, anyways, I'll mess with this later. But Oud De Grand is one of my favorite jasmine fragrances ever. I've smelled actual jasmine otto, which is very rare and hard to come by, thanks to Russian Atom. And the pure jasmine oils are unbelievable. I mean, they're nothing, I don't want to say nothing, but they're so different from what you smell in many fragrances. This captures that, this really captures, I would say, the spirit of pure jasmine otto. And it is Jasmine Grandiflorum with this very sort of gourmand take on Thai Oud. Okay, it's like a gourmand take on Thai Oud. So that is Oud De Grand. What am I going to do? Are you going to even fit in the box? Yes, you will. Okay, you'll fit in the box like that. I'll mess with you later, buddy. I'll mess with you later. Let me put you all back together. Go back into your home. Go back into your home. There's a lot of boxes here. You go in there, and you go in there. Okay. Oud De Grand is back. But yes, if you're a fan of, if you are a fan of, I think they said this is something like 50% Thai Oud or something. I forget exactly how much, but there was a lot of Thai Oud. With the jasmine and some pink pepper, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant jasmine Oud. Actually, probably my favorite jasmine Oud. Okay, a couple more jasmines. One is Reflection Man, which I have a full review on the channel, I think. Or maybe it's a comparison video to Reflection 45. I can't remember. But I have discussed Reflection Man on the channel in one way or another. This is a very sort of daring release by Amouage, because very rarely do you see this type of floral type of fragrance marketed towards men. Jean-Paul Gaultier did it with a Le Male flanker called Fleur du Mal, which also came out in 2007. So that's like the designer version. This is the niche version. Francis Kirkjohn made that one. This one's created by Lucas Swiezak, which I think this is one of his best creations. I think he did his best work for Amouage. But the jasmine in here is one of my favorite takes on jasmine. So go watch my review on Reflection Man. And then if you want like a animalic, indolic, challenging jasmine, this is the one I would tell you to check out. This is Amouage Opus 9. It's interesting that two of my favorite jasmines are Amouage's. I like that Middle Eastern style jasmine, I guess. But here it's jasmine with camellia, which is supposedly a mute flower, black pepper, beeswax, leather, gaiac wood, civet, ambergris, and vetiver. I just reviewed this within the last couple month or so. So go check out my review of Opus 9. Rumor is it's discontinued because it's not in the Amouage set any longer. But Opus 9 is worth a sniff. Go check out my review if you want to learn more on Opus 9. Okay, next on the list, we're going to Labdanum. Now, Labdanum comes from the rock rose, and back in the day, they basically used to let goats kind of chew it because it was very hard to harvest this stuff. So the goats would chew this rock rose, which even though it has rose in it, it's not related to rose in any way. It's its own kind of plant. And the Labdanum would actually stick to the billy goats like, fur, their beard almost. And there was a special brush these farmers would use, and they would brush the Labdanum out of the beards of the goat back in the day. Labdanum's been used to heal wounds in wars because it's so sticky. It almost works like super glue before super glue was invented for a war, for closing a wound in a war. And so Labdanum is one of my favorite materials. It can be leathery, it can be ambery, it can be very sticky and resinous, and it smells so amazing on its own. I think Labdanum could be a fragrance in and of itself, but this is not a top 10 Labdanum, but just a couple to highlight here in this video. Le Lion. So obviously this is like King Labdanum for me. Le Lion is king of the Labdanum jungle. Came out in 2020. My God, what a fragrance. Bergamot, lemon, Labdanum, bourbon vanilla, patchouli, and sandalwood. Olivier Polge is the perfumer. Definitely one of my favorites from this less exclusive collection. And then there's one which I reviewed, and I haven't reviewed many from this house, but this one I happened to review it. A2, a friend of the channel, reached out and said, hey man, I know you like this from your decant. I have a bottle. You can have it. And he sent this to me as a gift. This is Tiziana Terenzi's Lano Nero. Lano Nero uses some other things in here, which are it's not just Labdanum, but I think this is one of the best Labdanum kind of fragrances in my collection. But there's all kind of things in here: cognac, absinthe, myrtle, tobacco, acacia honey, camphor tree, iris, red rose, rosemary. There's a note of slate. There's frankincense. There's a note of capers. If you like capers in your Italian food, there's a caper note in here. Musk, oud, and of course oud. So there's all kind of things going on, but it revolves around the Labdanum. Lano Nero. Like, I think black Labdanum or something like that. But it is definitely worth the sniff if you're a Labdanum lover. Now, the next two are off of decants. I reviewed on the channel, so you can check them out. One is from the Zoo, and it's called Everlasting. And that is just Labdanum and this amazing narcissus note with some moss. And then the other one is Tom Ford's Sahara Noir, which I would love a bottle of Sahara Noir one day. 2013 release, very smoky and resinous, papery papyrus notes. Imagine like old scrolls with Labdanum and oud and vanilla. Rodrigo Flores Rue was the perfumer of that. I think that's a reference Labdanum fragrance. And finally, one you might not expect, but I am going to mention it here because the Labdanum is so prominent. Now, Roja loves Labdanum. In his sort of fragrance he created, which he claimed was not to be released to the public. It was supposed to be his fragrance. He said he created it for himself. I reviewed this on the channel, by the way. Rochas Oat Lux from 2013. And actually, it's just called Roja, but everyone calls it Oat Lux because that's the collection it's in. The one with the gold flakes in it, because of course that's Roja's kind of style. Bergamot, ylang ylang. This could also be in the ylang ylang reference side, but really when you spray, you're gonna realize that it is a chypre fragrance built around just an overdose of Labdanum. There's a ton of Labdanum in here, but you get a lot of other things as well. You get the beautiful florals. You get iris, of course. The purple cap gives you an idea. Roja loves iris as well. But the Labdanum in here is really something. I really think this is one of the best Labdanum fragrances out there. But for the money, you definitely want more than that. And it is more than that. It's kind of a shapeshifter. But go check out my review. Okay, so that finishes up Labdanum. So we've got 8 or so left. So next on the list, we have Lavender. Now, The lavender fragrances that I chose to kind of highlight here are going to try to show you kind of the side of lavender which I personally prefer. I don't like it when lavender turns into like laundry sheet like smells, like bounce dryer sheets. I'm out. But it is, I think, one of the most popular fragrance ingredients in masculine perfumery. Very delicate, very herbal, sometimes very floral, depending on how it's used. Also can be woody and evergreen smelling and clean and delicate and all that stuff. So the first one I'm going to show you is like an all-time classic, okay? One of the first fragrances kind of marketed towards men. And apparently, rumor is it's discontinued, which if that's true, that's really, really sad. But my issue is that I got a newer bottle, and I still have it. It's up there. I just never pull it down because I hate it. I hated the newer version. But I got a bottle from the 80s, and it almost smells like the 80s bottle smells so different to me. You know, like there's some animalic notes put in here that are missing from the one I got from the modern day bottle. And it's Geron's Pour un Homme. And you can see what lavender does to a fragrance. Lavender is green. It's not purple. The flowers look purple in an image, so people think the juice is purple. It's not. It's green. And so this is lavender, vanilla, with lavender absolute, amber, and musk. And it is just a reference lavender. Very old school. I could totally see my great-grandfather wearing this. But I love it. It's a reference lavender. You cannot go wrong. If you want to study lavender, that's one. Another one, which is probably hard to find because it's also discontinued, is from the house of Jean-Marc Sinan, and this is called Version Originale from 1984. There you go, Version Originale. And so you want to get the one with kind of the gold around it if you can. I think the newer bottles had like just all black. But there really wasn't much difference, I don't think, because this only ran for a certain amount of time. This guy had a very interesting story. He almost lost his mind. He tried to almost wipe out any existence that this fragrance ever existed. He tried to buy back every single bottle he could and like buried them and tried to destroy them, basically. And apparently he's still perfuming, but he's running like some weird museum somewhere. I don't know. It's a weird story because he was competing with the Dior and Chanel's and all that, and then he just lost his mind. This Jean-Marc Sinan. I don't want to say he lost his mind, but he just felt like, which I did say that, but I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say that he felt that this was not his calling anymore. And so he wanted to take all of his artwork away from the world, almost, is what it seemed like. But the reason this is here is because this is one of my favorite, I'm going to call it like an angry lavender, because the lavender here is like lavender fields in a thunderstorm. Like imagine a thunderstorm full of electricity and lightning and, you know, excitement. You know, there's this peppery kind of harshness to this lavender. Oh, but I love this fragrance. This is really one of my personal favorite lavenders. But my all-time favorite, like if you said, Ramsey, I want to study lavender, what should I get? It would have to be Bois de Portugal. Bois de Portugal for me is like a reference lavender scent. It's lavender with that creed, sandalwood, cedarwood combo with some vetiver and some citruses. But the lavender in here is to die for. And Takasago, I think, is the oil producer for Bois de Portugal, because it depends where the perfumer was working when they created the scent. And I think Pierre Bourdon was at Takasago at the time. So I've often thought that, Takasago hasn't gone down the greed route as much as some of these other houses, and that they're still providing really good quality oils, because this is a 2018 batch and it smells amazing. It doesn't smell as great as my I think I had a 2013 bottle, a 75 ml that I went through, and then I ended up getting this this decanter. But it's for a modern creed. This is one of the ones that I think has been reformulated very well. Let's put it that way. Okay, and then next on the list, we're going to talk about Neroli. Now, Neroli, I've done an entire video. This is not a top 10 Neroli. You can check it out. It's kind of like a greener side of the orange blossom tree, and it all depends on how the oil is sort of distilled, from my understanding. If you want to really go into the detail, go watch my review, or go watch my This Is Not a Top 10 video where I really get into the weeds on Neroli versus Orange Blossom. But there's two Neroli fragrances I'm going to highlight. One I've reviewed, one I have not. The first one, which I have a full review on, is from the House of Guerlain. It's called Neroli Ultra Noir. And actually, if I could own one fragrance from that Art and Le Matier line, that's the one I would add to the collection. I was in love with Neroli Ultra Noir from the first sniff. I love that smoky tea mixed with the green smelling neroli, and then the ambrette and the myrrh and the moss, that base that it sits on. Just brilliant fragrance. There's basically every part of the orange blossom tree in here. There is orange blossom, there's neroli, and there's Petit Grain, which is kind of the sticks and twigs of the tree itself, distilled, from my understanding. But this is just, I think, one of Thierry Wasser's best works from 2016. The other one is Creed Neroli Sauvage, and I use this whole bottle. You can see, although spraying it on in the summer, you can just spray away a lot of times. So I did probably over apply this, but I ran through this entire bottle. Neroli Sauvage from 1994. Neroli, Vervain, Grapefruit, Bergamot, Bitter Orange, Lemon, Orange Blossom, and Ambergris. Apparently you can still buy this, but God knows what type of shape the scent is actually in. Okay, next on the list, we're going to do Orange Blossom. And Orange Blossom is usually a little bit more soapy. It has that soapy white floral feel, whereas Neroli has that kind of green, bitter type feel to it. And so the first one we're going to mention, a pure out and out sort of reference, and I don't even think I grabbed it, is Serge Lutton's Fleur d'Oranger. And Fleur d'Oranger is Orange Blossom Heaven. It is orange blossom with white rose and Egyptian jasmine. Christopher Sheldrake created this. Very floral, spicy. I don't know if, there's a couple fragrances that, when it comes to Serge Lutton, where I just feel like I don't know if you can improve on it. You know what I mean? Like, it is like perfection. Ombre Sultan is one such fragrance. Like, that is amber perfection. This is orange blossom perfection. I don't know if you can improve on this. And I'm not the biggest orange blossom fan. I haven't smelled the Les Indemodables Oranger, Sirac, or whatever it is. But, I mean, I just feel like orange blossom is covered with this. And then there's actually one more, which I have to give a shout out to. Dusan from Serbia. He sent me these beautiful decants, and one of which is a vintage L'Artisan Parfumeur called Seville à l'Aube. And this was interestingly a creation by Bertrand Duchefort. The scent was basically created based on a memory of a perfume blogger named Denise Beaulieu. She accompanied the creative process and documented it in her book, The Perfume Lover. But what's so crazy about this is Petit Grain, plant juice, aldehydes, lavender, orange blossom. So you get a pretty respectable hit of lavender. You get this huge orange blossom. But like most Bertrand Ducheforts, of course, he has to do things different from everyone else. He's really a creator who really goes his own way, and I really respect that about him. So he's mixed some white blossoms and jasmine, which go well with orange blossom. This has orange blossom and jasmine as well. But he's mixed it with beeswax, animalic, harsh, like beeswax, and resins. So there's resins, beeswax, amber, rose, and then, of course, it's a Bertrand Duchefort, so you have to have smoke of some kind, so there's frankincense in here. So imagine like a smoky, beeswaxy orange blossom. It is weird, I'm not going to lie, but it's also unique in one. It's like one of the reference orange blossom scents for me, along with Fleur d'Oranger. Okay, next on the list, we're going to talk about pine. Now, everyone knows pine, coniferous, foresty, sharp, kind of refreshing type smell. Imagine the pine trees in the winter with sort of ice on them and all that good stuff. And so my reference pine fragrances are probably not going to be a surprise to you. From 1976, we have Yatagan. Yatagan is a brilliant pine. I've got multiple bottles of this stuff. and just earthy, woody sort of creation in general, I would say. It's got galbanum, tarragon, which is one of my secret ingredients, lavender, pine needles, carnation, geranium, jasmine, patchouli, vetiver, labdanum, leather, oak moss, musk, styrax, amber, and coconut. Vincent Marcello created this, and it's literally, to me, it's like you're in the forest, the pine needles and the leaves have kind of fallen, and you're walking through the forest and you're kicking up this pine needle leaf combination, you know, stuff that's fallen from the trees, pine cones and all that stuff. But it sat there for months. So when you're walking through, you know, you're kicking some of this stuff up, and underneath there's all of this kind of, you know, covered, slightly moldy undergrowth that is kind of brewing. You know, when it's covered up, all the mosses and bacteria and all that stuff can just kind of brew, especially if maybe it rained and got wet and all that stuff. That's kind of how Oud De Grand feels to me with the pine needles. Very well done though. This came out in '76, and then of course the reference pine for most folks is Polo Green. This is a Cosmere bottle. I would recommend going for a Cosmere or a Warner if possible. The new stuff is but this is what a man should smell like to me. It's pine, leather, tobacco, oak moss, tarragon, basically everything you need in a scent. Patchouli, vetiver. Carlos Benaim created this, and what a creation. And then the final pine we're going to discuss is Filinagil. And Filinagil is, for me, one of the greatest sort of sappy pine smells. So if you can imagine like putting your hand in a tree that's filled with sap, and you didn't realize it was sappy though. You lean on a tree, you're talking to a friend, you pull your hand away and it's covered in sap. And in the distance there's like a bonfire, and you smell slight wisps of frankincense, spices on the wind. This really smells like wintertime. It really smells like Christmas, pine needles, and just sap, you know, tree sap. It's amazing. I think it's one of Christopher Sheldrake's masterpieces, and he has many. Okay, next on the list we're going to talk about plum, and plum is a fruity scent that some people love, some people don't like plum. I'm sort of when I have one of my all-time favorite plum fragrances, I love it. My problem with plum is that it's not done well very often, or maybe the bar is set too high based on some of these that I've smelled. So the first one we're going to discuss is, I think, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, plum usage I've ever smelled. It's Rochas Femme. Now, Rochas Femme is also one of the greatest just fragrances of all time, period. But this is an Edmund Rudnitska from 1945. Bergamot, lemon, rosewood, cinnamon, plum, apricot, and peach. But it's the plum that stands out the most to me of those three fruity notes. Clove, iris, immortelle, jasmine, May rose, ylang ylang, amber, benzoin, civet, leather, musk, oak moss, patchouli, sandalwood, and vanilla. If you want like a Chypre meets an Oriental, kind of like, you know, Chypre Palaton, try Rochas Femme. And don't let it stop you that it says femme if you're a guy. Trust me. Trust me. Okay. Next on the list, we have a fragrance from 1983, and it's called Badage. Now, this has really grown on me, and actually, my 4-year-old daughter has worn this a couple times, and it smells amazing on her. It's aldehydes, plums, tuberose. I think this is like the precursor to poison, okay? In my opinion. But on my skin, I actually get more of the oriental notes, the apopanaxes, the resins, the vanillas, and all that good stuff, and the fruity notes in the top. On my daughter's skin, when she wears it, when I spray it on her, more of the florals come out. Or maybe that's just smelling it on somebody else. I don't know. But I get much more of the jasmine, orange blossom, tuberose, and stuff like that off of her. But on me, I get a lot more of the plum from Badage. I love it. I actually think I like it more than poison, surprisingly. So, okay, next on the list, we've got the final... no, there's actually 2 more plum fragrances. So the first one is from 2009. It is Féminité du Bois. the femininity of wood. Christopher Sheldrake, Serge Luton, and Pierre Bourdon, a triumvirate of perfumers. Plum, cedarwood, multiple floral notes. Just one of the greatest. I mean, I think one of the greatest fragrances of all time. Many perfumers, when asked if they could make something that they did not make, what would it be? Many of them say Feminine du Bois, that this kind of changed the game, if you will. And I'm going to shock some of you guys with my next pick here, because most people think this line is shite, at least for the folks who have kind of moved on from wearing just designer fragrances. But this is from Guerlain's designer line. It's called L'Homme Ideal Extreme. And this stuff is an amazing sort of heliotrope, plum, almond, tobacco, leather. The plum in particular is quite surprisingly good in L'Homme Ideal Extreme. If you can stand a little bit of sweetness sometimes, check this one out. This is well done by Guerlain. Okay, next on the list we've got Tuberose. Now, there is one tuberose fragrance to me that if you want just a reference tuberose fragrance, this is it. You're not going to do any better. Don't look. To me, it's Robert Piguet's Fracas. And Fracas is this creamy tuberose with teeth, man. I wore this to bed one night. I swear to God, I had like 4 fragrances on. All I could smell was Fracas. It was just relentless. But it perfectly, I think, encapsulates this very narcotic kind of smell of tuberose, in my opinion. Tuberose is very sensual, narcotic, and sometimes it can be green and camphoraceous. Sometimes it can have tinges of this honeyed floral feel that feels very rich, ambrosial, some folks will say. But tuberose is I've never smelled a fragrance that I think better encapsulates tuberose than Fracas. Just, it's not my style of fragrance to wear, as I'm not going to lie. I have a hard time wearing this as my scent of the day, but I think that if you want a reference tuberose, that's one you have to look at. Okay, so, and there's other florals in there as well. There's hyacinth, there's iris, there's jasmine, carnation, orange blossom, geranium, lily of the valley, osmanthus, narcissus, and violet. I mean, what floral doesn't Fracas have? But it highlights that tuberose brilliantly. Okay, next we've got a next we have a fragrance that I actually forgot to add in here. There's so many I forgot. This one's called Carnal. Sorry, we're gonna wait on that one. Next, we're going to do, since we're going in order, Fracas came out in 1948, believe it or not. So we're going to fast forward to 1985, and this is Poison. Of course, it had to be here. You know, the poison apple, the poison tuberose, although there's plum, hence the color of the bottle. This also could be on the best plum fragrance list for me as well. But this highlights the tuberose more on my skin than Balahae, so that's why it's here. But you get a lot of kind of oriental touches as well. A Papanac. I mean, between things like opium and this, some of the strongest, most fragrances that really had personality, you know? And so Poison, I can't wear this. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I can wear it to bed, but I can't wear this out and about in the day. This is not something that I want to wear as my scent of the day. But I'll tell you what, I've smelled it on other people, women mostly, and I think it smells amazing. But I just don't want to personally wear it. Another one, which I think is like a reference tuberose, but I don't want to wear, is Carnal Flower. Carnal Flower was created by Dominique Ropion in 2005. It highlights more of the camphoraceous aspects of patchouli. He used eucalyptus to pull out some of those camphoraceous aspects. There is coconut with the tuberose, and he used lots of white musks. I see Carnal Flower as a reference tuberose, but again, it's not something I would rather wear Fracas than Carnal Flower. Personally, just my 2 cents. If you forced me to wear a tuberose, I would rather wear a Fracas. And if you really forced me to wear a tuberose, I would wear something like Dessandra's. I like the way Antoine Lee uses tuberose. I reviewed a fragrance called Vierges et Toreros, which basically means virgins and bullfighters. hell of a name, by the way, by Etat Libre d'Orange. And that's an Antoine Lee, and there he used tuberose very similar. You know, I would wear something like Night Flower by Eris Parfums. That was an Antoine Lee, but that's not, it didn't feel like the tuberose was highlighted there. Here, Fracas and Carnal Flower, you know, the tuberose is definitely highlighted. It's just not the way I like my tuberose done, if that makes sense. Okay, next on the list we have the final entry, which is Violet. And Violet is a very sort of tender flower, is the way to put it. I heard someone once mentioned that violets are kind of very small. They grow in between cracks, and if you're walking in the forest, you can just easily step on a violet and not even realize it. You know, it has this very tender aura about it, and it's very soft, powdery type smell. Sweet, candied kind of violet smell. So for me, instantly the first fragrance that came to mind was this. One of my favorite powdery floral creations, and you can't see this because this is just a terrible like refill bottle, but this is L'Air Bleu. I guess you can see it, but you don't see the actual bottle because it's just a refill bottle. But this is the Eau de Parfum. I am in love with L'Air Bleu. I'm also in love with this Grossmith fragrance I reviewed on the channel within the last month or two that smelled so much like L'Air Bleu but came out years before. L'Air Bleu came out in like 1912 or something. And it came out years before that, which is crazy to think about. But it's anise, bergamot, carnation, neroli, iris, vanilla, benzoin, tonka bean, and violet. And the thing about L'Air Bleu, the reason that this was the very first thing that come to mind when I thought about violet is because the color purple, you know, the purple violet. And you think about sunset or the L'Air Bleu basically means like the blue hour. And the blue hour was supposed to kind of highlight the hour that the sun is set past the horizon, but it's still light out. It's not full dark yet, right? And that powdery, violety imagery is so captured in this fragrance. You know, this is the fragrance that Jacques Guerlain basically said, one of my favorite quotes in all of perfumery. He said, I felt something so strongly that I could only put it in a perfume. I couldn't tell you what I feel in words. I had to put it in a perfume, right? That is L'Air Bleu to me. So, okay. So just a couple more violets, and this next one may shock you a little bit because it's a big leather. It's a quote unquote Russian leather, if you believe what Rochas says. Although it smells much more like, to me, it personally smells more like Cuir Moresque by Serge Lutens or Cuir Knize by Dior, and it came out after those two. But this one's Great Britain in the cool packaging, you must admit. Silk. Bottles can only sit in the finest of silks. But Great Britain is leathery, woody, lots of ambrette and leather and stuff like that. I love this fragrance. It's one of my favorite kind of modern leathers, if you will. But in the heart of it is this violet. And if you look at the purple cap, it kind of really gives you an idea, and the purple writing and all that stuff. But there's this very soft, tender violet if you pay attention in here. And I think it highlights what the violet really, how most of the times you're going to smell violet in a perfume. It perfectly highlights that because it's this big kind of leather, Russian leather style fragrance, as Rochas says. Although I don't think it smells like a true Russian leather, but I'm not going to go there. But the violet and the way it's used, I think, is a perfect example. And finally, last one, and then we'll call this video quits. And probably, if you're a lover of makeup-y, cosmetic scents, and you've never smelled this, you have to. This is called Lipstick Rose by Ralph Schwieger. And this is what the original Frédéric Malle labels looked like, by the way, when the brand first came out in the year 2000. The cap would have been matte cap if I had a cap, but I don't. But this is I mean, this is a fragrance that puts a smile on my face every time because the violet is such an integral part of the lipstick accord that Ralph Schreiger created. But it's literally like if you can just imagine kissing the most beautiful girl of your dreams and she's wearing the thickest, reddest lipstick, but it tastes like violet. Okay, that's the smell of lipstick rose. A little raspberry, lots of iris, lots of rose, and vanilla. I thought I would be like on this fragrance, but I fucking love it. Honestly, that's my 2 cents. I love lipstick rose. And it's still being marketed by. It's still available. So that is my reference video part 3. Probably the last one of these we're gonna do for a while. I'm not gonna lie, it's a bitch pulling all these out and putting them back and all that stuff. But I hope you guys enjoy this. We're coming up on 1,000 videos. We have the great Liz Moore's coming on the channel August the 10th at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, 2024, of course. If you watch this video a couple years from now, sorry for you. But Liz Moore's, I hope you guys can make the interview, make the live stream. I am preparing some questions myself, but I want to take lots of questions from the audience, so come prepared. Thanks, everybody. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.